My mother locked the front door while I was still standing on the porch. It was 38 degrees. The rain had soaked through my coat in under a minute. I knocked twice. She turned off the porch light. "This is a lesson you need, Brianna," she said through the glass. "You want to be independent? Then be independent." Tonight I did not cry. I did not beg. I walked to my car, sat in the dark, and called the one person who had never once made me feel small. My grandmother answered on the second ring. What my mother did not know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years before that night, Grandma Eleanor had already signed every document that mattered. The house my mother was standing in, the accounts she was counting on. The name on all of it, mine. You will not believe what Grandma Eleanor said when the lawyer opened that final envelope. "Before I go on, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever been punished by the one person who was supposed to protect you." My name is Brianna Hayes. I am 32 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that if I was just good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, my mother would eventually see me. She never did. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house that looked like something off the cover of a lifestyle magazine. 4 bedrooms, white trim, a wrap-around porch. Eleanor had planted with hydrangeas every spring since 1987. From the outside, we were the kind of family other people admired at church. Inside, there were rules, but not the kind anyone wrote down. You learned them by breaking them. My mother, Diane Hayes, ran the household the way some people run a corporation: efficient, hierarchical, unsentimental. She was 58 years old and had never once, in my memory, apologized for anything. Not a raised voice, not a slammed door, not a holiday ruined by something I had apparently done wrong without knowing. She did not apologize because in her mind she was never wrong. She was teaching, always teaching. My brother Ryan was 36, 2 years older than me, and he had never needed a single lesson. Ryan could do no wrong. Not when he wrecked the car at 19. Not when he dropped out of his MBA program, and Diane quietly paid his rent for 8 months without mentioning it to anyone. Not when his first business failed and she co-signed a loan to help him start a second one. Ryan was the heir apparent, the one who carried the Hayes name the way Diane wanted it carried, loudly, confidently, without self-doubt. She beamed at him across every dinner table. She saved his voicemails. I was the one who needed shaping. Looking back now, I can trace it all the way to childhood. I was the one sent to my room for asking too many questions, the one told I was too sensitive when I cried at her tone, the one who had to earn weekend plans while Ryan's were assumed. Diane had a word for it. She called it preparation. She said the world was hard, and she was harder so that I would be ready. I spent 20 years trying to believe that. I became an interior designer. Not the kind who works for a firm and reports to someone at 9 in the morning. The kind who takes private contracts, works with developers and private estates, invoices under my LLC, and deposits the payments into an account my mother did not know existed. I was good at it. I had built something real and quiet and entirely my own. I did not tell Diane because I had learned early that anything good in my life became a negotiation. If she knew I was earning well, she would find a reason I owed her something. So I kept it to myself. I drove a modest car. I dressed plainly when I visited. I let her believe I was getting by. The only person who knew the full truth was Eleanor. My grandmother had lived in the same house on Birchwood Lane for 41 years. A different house from the one Diane occupied, smaller, older, with a kitchen that smelled like Earl Grey and wood polish, and something I still cannot name, but will associate until I die with the feeling of being safe. Eleanor Hayes was 79 years old, 5'2", and possessed of a stillness that made other people feel examined. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When Eleanor spoke, people listened, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it across 8 decades of saying exactly what she meant and nothing more. She had watched Diane for 30 years. She never said much about it, but she watched. When I was 24 and had just started my first real contract, I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and told her everything: the LLC, the savings, the clients, the careful hiding of it all. I expected her to tell me to be honest with my mother. Instead, she set down her cup, looked at me for a long moment and said, "Good. You keep that to yourself." A woman should always have something that is entirely hers. I thought she was talking about independence in the general sense. I did not understand yet that she was talking about something specific, something she had already set in motion. Eleanor had her own history with Diane that neither of them ever discussed in front of me. I knew it existed the way you know weather is coming, by the particular quality of silence between two people when a certain subject is approached. Eleanor had built the family's modest wealth over decades. A small residential property management company she had run with my grandfather until he passed 3 rental properties in Fairfield County, and savings accumulated with the kind of discipline that belongs to a generation that did not trust abundance to last. When my grandfather died, everything passed to Eleanor outright, and what Eleanor did with it after that was her business and no one else's. Diane assumed she knew. Diane assumed a great deal. The night my mother turned off the porch light, I had just returned from a 4-day project in New Haven. I was tired, my bag was in the car, I had not planned to stay. I only stopped because I had left a folder of client documents in my old bedroom the week prior and needed them before a morning meeting. I rang the bell. Diane opened the door, looked at my wet coat, and told me I had called twice this week without asking if it was a good time and that she needed me to learn consideration. Then she stepped back inside and locked the door. Ryan's car was in the driveway. The lights in the living room were on. Through the window, I could see his wife, Amber, on the couch with a glass of wine. Nobody moved. I stood there for 11 seconds. I counted them. Then I walked to my car. I was not going to beg. Not that night. Not ever again. I sat in the driveway for a moment, with the heat running and rain hitting the windshield in sheets. The folder I needed was still inside. I thought about knocking again. Then I thought about the look on Diane's face through the glass. Not angry, not conflicted, just settled, like she had completed a task. And I put the car in reverse. The temperature had dropped to 36 degrees by the time I pulled out onto Birchwood Lane. I had no plan. I was wet, tired, and operating on 4 hours of sleep from the night before. My New Haven client had requested 3 rounds of revisions on a single floor plan, and I had eaten lunch at my desk and driven 90 minutes home, and all I had wanted was to retrieve a folder and sleep somewhere familiar. Instead, I was driving in the rain at 9:40 on a Tuesday night with nowhere specific to go. I called Eleanor. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did. Not rushed, not surprised, as if she had simply been expecting the phone to ring and had been sitting quietly until it did. "Grandma," I said, and then I stopped, because I did not know what to say after that. There was a brief pause. Not uncomfortable. Eleanor's pauses never were. She was just listening to what was underneath the word. "Where are you?" she asked, in the car. I was at Mom's." Another pause. Then, "Come to me, and bring nothing of hers with you." That was all she said. I turned left at the stop sign and drove 6 blocks to her house. Eleanor was waiting at the door when I pulled up, which meant she had moved there immediately after hanging up. She was wearing her green cardigan, the one with the loose button on the second from bottom, that she had been meaning to fix for 2 years, and she had a towel in her hand before I even reached the porch steps. She did not ask me what happened. She draped the towel around my shoulders, took my bag, and walked me into the kitchen. There was already water on for tea. I sat at her table, the same table I had sat at since I was 7 years old doing homework while she cooked, and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not realized I was holding. I did not cry until the mug was in my hands, and even then it was just a few minutes. Eleanor sat across from me and did not try to fill the silence with comfort or commentary. She let me finish, then she said, "Tell me what she said." "Exactly," I told her. "The porch, the locked door, the lesson. Ryan's car in the driveway." The 11 seconds I stood there counting, Eleanor listened with her hands wrapped around her own mug and her eyes on the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, once the way she did when she had reached a conclusion. "She has done this before," Eleanor said. It was not a question, not exactly like this. "But yes, she looked up at me. "You're not going back there, Grandma. I'm not a teenager. I can't just—" "I did not say you were a teenager. I said you are not going back there." She said it the same way she said everything, level, unhurried, with a finality that did not invite discussion. "You will stay here tonight, and we will sort the rest out in the morning." I stayed. I slept in the room Eleanor kept for me, the one with the yellow curtains and the too soft mattress I had always meant to tell her about, and never had. I slept for 9 hours straight, which I had not done in months. In the morning, Eleanor made eggs and did not bring up Diane, and did not ask me to process anything before I had eaten. She poured coffee and set the sugar bowl next to my cup, because she remembered I used 2. We talked about my New Haven project. She asked specific questions. what material I had specified for the kitchen island, whether the client had a preference for matte or gloss fixtures, because Eleanor had always treated my work as a serious thing, worth discussing in detail. It was one of the many small ways she made me feel like a real person. It was after 9 when I noticed the folder on the side table near the hallway. Not my folder, hers. A thick manila envelope, the kind that comes from a law office, with a return address I did not recognize, and Eleanor's name written across the front, in the precise font of someone's legal assistant. It had been opened. The papers inside were partially visible. I could see a header with the words Revocable Living Trust, and below that in smaller print, Hayes Family Trust, Eleanor M. Hayes, grantor. I looked at it for 2 seconds and looked away. Eleanor came back into the room with the coffee pot and caught where my eyes had been. She set the pot down. She sat. She folded her hands on the table the way she did when she was about to say something she had been turning over for a while. "There are things I should have told you sooner," she said. "I kept waiting for the right time. I think last night was the right time. Grandma, let me finish." She looked at me steadily. "I am not a woman who leaves things to chance. I never have been. Your grandfather knew that about me, and it was one of the reasons we built what we built. When he passed, I made decisions about what would happen to what we had built. About who could be trusted with it." She paused. "I want you to meet with Charles Aldridge. He's been my attorney for 11 years. I've already called him this morning. He has an appointment for you at 2 o'clock. "What kind of appointment?" Eleanor picked up her coffee cup. "The kind where someone explains to you, in legal terms, what I have already decided in plain ones." She met my eyes. "You are going to be all right, Brianna. I made sure of it. I just needed you to be ready to hear it." I opened my mouth. She shook her head gently, not dismissive, just certain. "Finish your eggs," she said. "Charles is very thorough. You'll want to go in with a full stomach." I finished my eggs. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the yard was bright with the particular clean light that follows a night of heavy weather. I looked at the hydrangeas along Eleanor's back fence, still holding the last of the season's color, and thought about how she had planted the same ones at the house on Birchwood Lane 30 years ago. I did not know yet what Charles Aldridge was going to tell me, but I understood, sitting there, that whatever my mother thought she had taken from me the night before, whatever lesson she believed she had taught, she had in fact only pushed me toward something she did not know existed, and that Eleanor had been waiting, patient and quiet, for exactly this moment. Charles Aldridge's office was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Stamford, the kind of office that communicates competence without trying to impress you. Dark wood, neutral carpet, a receptionist who offered water before you sat down. I arrived 7 minutes early and spent those 7 minutes in the lobby, reading the same paragraph of a magazine 3 times without retaining a single word. I did not know what I was walking into. Eleanor had told me almost nothing beyond the appointment itself, and I had spent the 40-minute drive running through possibilities, each one dissolving before I could get a firm hold on it. A gift. A loan. Some kind of arrangement Eleanor wanted to make while she was still well enough to make it. I knew she had money. I knew the rental properties existed. She had mentioned them in passing over the years, the way people mention things they consider settled and therefore uninteresting. I had not mapped it into numbers. I had not let myself. The receptionist showed me in at 2 o'clock exactly. Charles Aldridge was in his late 60s, trim, with the kind of unhurried manner that belongs to people who have delivered significant news so many times it no longer makes them nervous. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and opened a folder that was already waiting in the center of his blotter. "Miss Hayes," he said, "thank you for coming on short notice. Your grandmother asked me to be thorough with you today, so I'm going to start from the beginning and take as much time as you need." "Okay," I said. "Eleanor established the Hayes Family Revocable Living Trust 3 years ago. In November, he turned the first page toward me. At that time, she named herself as grantor and initial trustee, with the provision that upon her incapacitation or death, the trust would convert to an irrevocable trust, and all assets would transfer to the named successor trustee and sole beneficiary." He paused and looked up at me. "That person is you, Miss Hayes. You are named as sole successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the Hayes Family Trust." I heard the words. I understood them individually. It took several seconds for their arrangement to mean something. "Everything?" I said. "Everything held within the trust." "Yes." He turned another page. "That includes the residential property at 14 Birchwood Lane, Eleanor's home, as well as 3 rental properties in Fairfield County. The operating account and client contracts of Hayes Property Management LLC and liquid assets held in 2 trust accounts. He slid a summary sheet across the desk. The current combined valuation is approximately $1.4 million, exclusive of real estate, which adds a further estimated $800,000 at current market. I looked at the paper. The numbers were printed in a clean sans serif font that made them look calm and reasonable, which they were not. My mother's house, I said carefully. The one on 14 Birchwood Lane is Eleanor's property. It has always been Eleanor's property. Your mother has resided there as Eleanor's guest for the past 11 years, under an informal arrangement. There is no lease. There is no legal interest held by Diane Hayes in that property. He said it without emphasis, the way you state coordinates. Upon Eleanor's passing, or upon her written direction as current trustee, that property transfers to you. I set the summary sheet down. I looked at the window. Stamford skyline sat against a pale November sky, indifferent and familiar. She never told my mother, I said. Eleanor was very clear that she did not wish the trust's contents to be disclosed to any other family member. That has been the arrangement since the document was executed. Aldridge folded his hands. She was also very clear, when she called me this morning, that she wanted you to understand one specific thing. He glanced at a notepad to his left. She asked me to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, Brianna did not earn this because she was good to me, though she was. She earned it because she never once asked me for anything. That is rarer than people think. I did not say anything for a moment. She sounds like herself, I finally said. She does. Aldridge allowed a small smile. She also asked me to tell you not to change anything yet, not to make any decisions or take any action, just to know. She said, and again I'm quoting, knowing is enough for now. The rest will arrange itself. I drove back to Eleanor's in a state that did not have a clean name. It was not happiness exactly. It was not shock, though there was shock in it. It was something closer to the feeling of standing in a room and realizing the walls are further back than you thought, that the space you have been moving carefully through is actually much larger than you were led to believe. I had spent years making myself small in my mother's presence, hiding my income, moderating my confidence, editing my sentences before I spoke them so they would not invite commentary or correction. I had done all of it in a house that did not belong to her. In a family whose assets had already passed, quietly and legally to me. Eleanor was already asleep when I got back, which was unusual for 2 in the afternoon, and I sat in the kitchen with the Hayes Family Trust summary sheet on the table in front of me and did not make a sound. I did not call Diane. I did not call Ryan. I did not call anyone. I thought about Eleanor saying, the rest will arrange itself. I had always taken that phrase as a kind of patient optimism, the philosophy of a woman who had lived long enough to see things work out more often than not. Sitting there with that document, I understood it differently. It was not optimism, it was engineering. Eleanor had built something, placed it carefully, and was now waiting with characteristic stillness for the structure to do what structures do when the conditions are right. I folded the summary sheet and put it in my bag. I made Eleanor's tea when she woke at 4. We watched the evening news together, and she did not ask me what Aldridge had said, and I did not volunteer it. We sat with it between us, understood and unspoken, the way Eleanor preferred the most important things. Before I turned off the kitchen light that night, she touched my arm once, briefly, and said, "Sleep well." I did. But 6 days later, Diane called, and the careful quiet Eleanor had built around me began for a time to feel very fragile indeed. Diane called on a Monday morning at 8:15, which was her preferred time for difficult conversations. Early enough to catch you before your day had built any momentum. Late enough that she could not be accused of being unreasonable. I was at Eleanor's kitchen table with coffee and my laptop open to a client brief when the phone rang. I looked at the screen. I let it ring 4 times. Then I answered, because not answering Diane was its own kind of provocation, and I was not ready for that particular battle yet. "I've been thinking about the other night," she said. No greeting. Diane did not waste words on preamble when she had a point to make. "I think you took it the wrong way." I waited. "You showed up unannounced. Brianna, I've asked you before to call ahead. I had Ryan and Amber there, and it wasn't a good time, and I needed you to understand that." A pause. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was setting a boundary. The word boundary, in Diane's vocabulary, meant something different than it meant in everyone else's. For Diane, a boundary was something she erected, never something she observed. "Okay," I said. A beat of silence. She had expected more resistance. When I didn't provide it, she recalibrated. I'd like you to come to Thanksgiving. Ryan and Amber will be here, and I think it's important we present as a family. I'll think about it, I said. Brianna, I said I'll think about it, Mom. She let that sit for a moment. Then her tone shifted, the way it always did when the opening negotiation failed and she moved to the secondary position. How is Eleanor? I've been meaning to call her, but I've been busy. Has she seemed all right to you? And there it was. Not concern for Eleanor. A reconnaissance question. Diane wanted to know how much time I was spending there, whether Eleanor was talking to me, what might be being said. She had always monitored my relationship with Eleanor, the way a person monitors a door they cannot lock. She's fine, I said. I'll tell her you asked. I hung up before it could become something longer. Eleanor was in the garden when I went outside, moving slowly along the rosebed with her pruning shears, wearing the canvas gloves she had owned for longer than I had been alive. I watched her from the back porch for a moment. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone who has stopped wasting motion, every step placed, every cut considered. I thought about what Aldridge had told me. 1.4 million in liquid assets, 3 rental properties. The house Diane was standing in, 6 blocks away, as certain of her position in it as she had ever been of anything. I thought about how long Eleanor had been carrying this. 3 years since the trust was signed, probably longer since she had decided. Moving through every family dinner, every phone call from Diane, every holiday gathering, with this information sitting inside her like a compass needle, steady, invisible, always pointing in the same direction. She heard the back door and looked up. How was the call? Instructive, I said. Eleanor made a sound that was not quite a laugh. She wants you at Thanksgiving. Yes, will you go? I sat on the porch step. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of November day that looks warmer than it is. I don't know yet. Should I? Eleanor turned back to the roses. She made one precise cut before she answered. That depends on what you want from the day. If you want peace, stay here. If you want information, another cut. Go. It was the most she had ever said to me about Diane's motives in a single sentence. I understood it as a kind of permission. I went to Thanksgiving. It was exactly what I expected and worse. Diane had arranged the table so that I was seated at the far end near Amber's mother, a woman I had met twice, while Ryan sat at Diane's right hand and was consulted on everything from the wine to the temperature of the dining room. I helped carry dishes. I answered questions about my work with the vague non-answers I had practiced for years. Diane held court at the head of the table with the ease of someone who has never once questioned whether the space they occupy belongs to them. After dessert, when Ryan and Amber had moved to the living room, and Diane and I were alone in the kitchen, she said, I think Eleanor should consider moving somewhere more manageable. She's alone in that house, and it's too big for her. I kept washing the dish in my hand. She loves that house. Love doesn't change the practicalities. If something happened to her, Diane's voice took on the tone she used when she was about to say something she had decided in advance. It would make more sense for Ryan and Amber to be nearby. They're thinking about starting a family. They need space. I rinsed the dish, set it in the rack. Reached for the next one. Eleanor is 79, Diane continued. At some point decisions are going to need to be made. I just think it's better to be practical before there's a crisis rather than after. I understood, in that moment, with complete and quiet clarity, exactly what she was describing. She was not talking about Eleanor's well-being. She was talking about the house. She had been doing the math for years, and she had arrived at the conclusion that Eleanor's death would produce an inheritance, and she was beginning carefully to position herself and Ryan in relation to it. She did not know the math had already been done. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I turned to face her. I looked at her for a moment in a way I had not allowed myself to before, not as my mother but as a person making a calculation. Then I said, I'll mention it to Eleanor. I would not mention it to Eleanor, but I would remember exactly what Diane had said, and how she had said it, and when she had chosen to say it. I filed it away with the precision I had learned from months of working with clients who changed their minds and then denied having done so. 2 days later, I had lunch with Charles Aldridge. I did not ask for the meeting. He called me. He said Eleanor had requested he walk me through the trust document in full detail, not the summary, the complete instrument, so that I understood not just what I was receiving, but how it was structured and what protections it contained. We sat in his office for 2 hours. He walked me through every clause, the spendthrift provision, The no contest clause, which meant that any beneficiary who challenged the trust would forfeit their interest entirely. Not that there were other beneficiaries, but Eleanor had included it anyway. The specific language around the Birchwood Lane property, which named Diane's occupancy as a revocable license that terminated automatically upon Eleanor's death or written revocation. Revocable, Aldridge said, at any time, for any reason, with 30 days written notice. I read that clause 3 times. Then I looked up at Aldridge and said, "She built this very carefully, Eleanor Hayes." He said, closing the folder, "Is one of the most precise clients I have had in 30 years of practice." He looked at me over his glasses. "She told me once that she did not believe in accidents. She said every outcome she had ever witnessed, good or bad, was the result of a decision someone made and either owned or refused to own." He paused. "She said she intended to own hers." I drove back to Birchwood Lane in the early dark of a November afternoon and sat with Eleanor over tea and did not tell her what I now fully understood. She already knew. She had always known. What neither of us knew yet was how quickly Diane was about to accelerate everything. Diane's apology arrived on a Thursday, 11 days after Thanksgiving, in the form of a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and contained the word "but" 7 times. She was sorry if I had felt excluded at dinner, but I had to understand that Ryan and Amber were going through a stressful period. She was sorry if the comment about Eleanor's house had come across as insensitive. But it was practical, and someone had to be practical. She was sorry I had taken the porch incident so personally, but I needed to understand that her home was her space, and she had a right to her boundaries. 7 buts. I counted. I told her I appreciated the call. I told her I understood. I used the word, "okay," 4 times in 4 minutes, which is its own kind of weapon when deployed correctly. It sounds like agreement without being one. When I hung up, I sat for a moment in the particular silence that follows a Diane phone call, the kind where you have to let the air in the room resettle before you can think clearly again. Eleanor was at her doctor's appointment that morning. She had been going more frequently over the past month, not alarmingly so, but enough that I noticed the pattern and did not comment on it, because Eleanor did not invite commentary on her health any more than she invited it on anything else she considered her own business. She came home at noon, looking tired in a way she did not usually look tired, and she sat in her chair by the window and closed her eyes for 20 minutes before she spoke. "Good appointment," she said, without opening her eyes, in the tone that meant she did not want to discuss it further. "Good," I said, and went back to my laptop. I had moved most of my work to Eleanor's dining room table by then. My lease in Norwalk was month to month, and I had quietly let it lapse in early December, transferring my things in 2 car trips on a Tuesday while Eleanor was resting. It was not a plan so much as an accumulation of obvious decisions. Eleanor had the space. I was spending most of my time there anyway, and something in me had shifted after the meeting with Aldridge, a loosening of the careful smallness I had maintained for years, a sense that I was allowed to take up the space that was, in fact, already mine. Ryan called the second week of December. This was unusual. Ryan and I did not have a calling relationship. We had a relationship that operated through Diane. She was the relay station, the one who translated us to each other, and filtered out whatever she found inconvenient in the process. A direct call from Ryan meant Diane had either asked him to call, or something had happened that she wanted reported, but did not want to report herself. "Hey," he said in the voice he used when he wanted something, slightly warmer than usual, slightly too casual. "How's everything?" "Fine," I said. "You? Good, good. Listen, I wanted to reach out because, Mom mentioned you'd been spending a lot of time at Grandma Eleanor's, and I just wanted to check in. Make sure everything's okay over there." "Everything's fine," I said. "Eleanor's well, right, right. Good." A pause. She seemed a little, I don't know, tired? "Last time I saw her, I just want to make sure she's not overdoing it. You know how she is. She won't ask for help even when she needs it." I was quiet for a moment. Ryan had not visited Eleanor in 6 weeks. I knew this because Eleanor mentioned it, once, not with bitterness but with the flat, factual tone she used to note things she had accepted. "I'll tell her you're thinking of her," I said. "Yeah, definitely. And hey, I've been meaning to say, if there's anything she needs help with, around the house or whatever, I'm happy to come by. Or if there are any decisions she's thinking about, bigger stuff, it might be worth having the whole family involved. Just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone on the same page." I recognized the phrase from Diane. She used it when she meant everyone agreeing with her. "I'll pass that along," I said. I did not pass it along, but I told Eleanor about the call that evening, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, because I did not keep things from her. I told her Ryan's exact words. The whole family involved. Everyone on the same page. Eleanor listened without expression. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her tea mug slowly in her hands. "How long do you think she's been planning?" I asked. "Your mother," Eleanor said, "has been planning since before your grandfather was in the ground." She said it without heat, as a statement of observable fact. She assumed he would leave things to me, and she assumed I would leave things to her. She has been patient. I will give her that. She set the mug down. She is about to be less patient. She was right. 2 days before Christmas, Diane called Eleanor directly. I was not in the room. I was upstairs with a client call of my own, headphones on, walking a couple through bathroom tile selections for a renovation in Westport. I heard Eleanor's voice below me through the floorboards, the particular register she used, when she was listening to something she found disappointing. And I wrapped up my call as quickly as I professionally could, and came downstairs to find Eleanor in her chair by the window. Phone face down on the armrest, looking at the garden. "Your mother," Eleanor said, without turning her head, "would like me to consider updating my estate planning documents." I sat down across from her. She suggested that a more equitable arrangement, her word, equitable, would reflect the contributions both branches of the family have made. Eleanor paused. She mentioned Ryan by name 4 times. "She mentioned you once, in the context of my not wanting to create resentment." I looked at my hands. "She also suggested," Eleanor continued, "that she could recommend her own attorney. Someone she described as very thorough and family-oriented." The room was quiet. Outside the window, the hydrangeas were bare sticks in the December cold, holding their position the way they always did, waiting without complaint for the season to change. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Eleanor turned from the window and looked at me. There was something in her expression I had not seen before, not anger, not hurt, something colder and more final than either. The look of a woman who has been patient for a very long time and has just received the last piece of information she needed. "I told her I would think about it," Eleanor said. She picked up her tea. She took a sip. She set it down. "I will not be thinking about it," she said. January arrived the way it always does in Greenwich, gray, settled, and indifferent to everyone's plans. The hydrangeas outside Eleanor's window were sticks in frozen ground. The rental properties needed boiler maintenance on 2 units, and Eleanor walked me through the process of contacting the service contractor she had used for 11 years, a man named Gerald, who charged fairly and arrived when he said he would, which Eleanor considered the highest professional virtue. I was learning the business without calling it that. Eleanor had begun, quietly and without ceremony, to include me in things. She would leave the property management ledger open on the kitchen table. She would mention a tenant's situation in passing. The couple in the Darien unit who had asked about lease renewal, the retired school teacher in Westport who always paid early and had requested permission to plant a small vegetable garden in the back. She did not instruct me. She narrated and let me absorb. It felt less like training than like being trusted with someone's ongoing life. I did not hear from Diane for 3 weeks after Christmas. The silence was not peace. I had grown up in this family long enough to know that Diane's silences were not absences. They were preparations. She called on a Wednesday in the 3rd week of January, and this time she did not start with an apology. "I've been talking to some people," she said, "and I think there are some things about Eleanor's situation that the fee needs to address." "What kind of things?" I said. "Her capacity, Brianna." Diane's voice had taken on the careful, measured tone she used when she had rehearsed. "She's 80 years old. She's making financial decisions. She's managing property. I'm not sure she's getting the support she needs to do that responsibly. I think it might be time to have a professional evaluate her." I was very still. "A professional evaluate her," I repeated. "A geriatric care specialist. Maybe a neurological workup. Just to make sure that the decisions she's making are fully her own." A pause. "I say this because I care about her." I understood, with a cold and precise clarity, what Diane was doing. She was not concerned about Eleanor's cognition. Eleanor was sharper than anyone in the family and had been for decades. What Diane was building, carefully, and with legal deliberation, was a paper trail. A documented concern about capacity. The kind of record that, if Eleanor's estate documents were ever challenged, would form the scaffolding of an argument that Eleanor had not been fully competent when she signed them. She was going to try to break the trust. I'll mention your concern to Eleanor, I said. I've already mentioned it to Eleanor, Diane said. She wasn't receptive. That's actually part of what concerns me. Resistance to evaluation can itself be a sign. Goodbye, Mom, I said, and hung up. I sat at Eleanor's dining room table for 6 minutes without moving. Then I called Charles Aldridge. He answered on the third ring. I told him what Diane had said, as precisely as I could, including the phrase resistance to evaluation can itself be a sign. There was a brief silence on his end. She's been talking to someone, he said. Not a question. That's what she told me. She said she'd been talking to some people. All right. Another pause shorter. I'm going to need you to do something for me. Going forward, I want you to document every communication from your mother that touches on Eleanor's capacity, Eleanor's property, or Eleanor's estate. Date, time, exact words, where possible. Email me after each one, he paused. And I want Eleanor to come in and see me. This week if possible. Eleanor came in on Friday. I drove her. She sat across from Aldridge in the same chair I had sat in 2 months earlier and listened to him explain the situation with her hands folded in her lap and her expression unchanged. When he finished, she asked 2 questions, both procedural, both precise, and then she said, I expected this. I simply did not expect it this soon. Do you want to discuss any changes to the document? Aldridge asked. No, Eleanor said. The document is exactly what I want it to be. She paused. I would like to add one thing. They spoke privately for 20 minutes while I waited in the reception area. When Eleanor came out, she looked composed and faintly satisfied, the expression she wore when she had completed a task she had been putting off. She said nothing about what had been added, and I did not ask. Diane moved faster than I anticipated. In the first week of February, she contacted 3 of Eleanor's siblings' children, cousins I had met at funerals, and not much else, and told them she was concerned about Eleanor's well-being, and that Brianna had been isolating Eleanor from the family. She used that word, isolating. 2 of the cousins called Eleanor directly to check on her. Eleanor thanked them for their concern and told them she was well and that she would see them in the spring. The 3rd cousin called me and said cautiously that he hoped everything was all right and that Diane had seemed very worked up. She's fine, I told him. She's gardening. Eleanor was, in fact, gardening. She had begun the early February work of clearing the beds and planning the spring layout, which she did every year with a hand-drawn diagram on graph paper, noting which plants had done well, which had struggled, what she would move or replace. She found it centering. I found it quietly remarkable. The ability to tend something with that kind of patience, knowing you were preparing it for a season you might or might not see. The second week of February, Diane filed a written complaint with Eleanor's primary care physician, expressing concern about her mother-in-law's cognitive state and requesting that the physician flag any signs of diminished capacity at Eleanor's next appointment. The physician called Eleanor to inform her, as was her obligation. Eleanor listened. She thanked the physician. She scheduled her regular appointment for the following week. Then she called me into the kitchen and sat down and told me what the physician had said. She was very calm. She told me the way she told me most things. Directly, without drama, with the information laid out so I could do something with it. She's trying to build a record, I said. Yes, Aldridge needs to know. I've already called him. Eleanor folded her hands on the table. There is something else I want to do. I have been thinking about it since Christmas. She looked at me steadily. I want to call a family meeting. Here. I want Diane and Ryan present. She paused. I want them to say, in front of witnesses, exactly what they want. I want it on record. I understood what she was doing. Not a confrontation, a documentation. She wanted Diane and Ryan to speak their intentions aloud, in Eleanor's home, in front of people who would remember. When? I said, March, she said. Give them enough rope. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. Then she said something I did not fully understand until much later. The thing about people who want what isn't theirs, Eleanor said, is that they cannot help themselves. If you wait long enough, they will always take one step further than they should. She turned to look at me. That step is the one that matters. I started keeping a log that night. Date, time, summary, direct quotes where I had them. I kept it in a document on my laptop and emailed a copy to Aldridge every Sunday evening. It was 23 pages by the time March arrived, and Diane, as Eleanor had predicted, took exactly one step too far. The family meeting was Eleanor's idea, but Diane believed it was hers. That was the elegant part. Eleanor had mentioned, in her phone call with Diane in late February, that she had been thinking about her affairs and felt it might be useful to have a conversation with the family before spring. She used the word conversation deliberately, open, unspecific, inviting. Diane heard it as an opening. She called Ryan within the hour. Ryan called me 2 days later, in the same too casual voice he used when Diane had scripted the call, to say that Mom thought it would be good for everyone to get together at Grandma's and talk through some things. He said he thought it was a good idea. He said it in the way people say things when they have been told to say them. Sure, I said. Eleanor mentioned it to me too, a beat of silence. He had not expected that. Great, he said. So you'll be there. I live here, I said. Another beat. Right, he said. Right. The meeting was set for a Saturday, in the second week of March, 11 in the morning. Eleanor chose the time. She also chose the seating. She asked me the night before to arrange the dining room so that she was at the head of the table, which was not where she usually sat. I moved her chair without comment. I also, at Aldridge's instruction, placed my phone on the sideboard in the corner, screen down, voice memo running before the first knock at the door. Charles Aldridge arrived at 10:30. Eleanor had invited him without telling Diane or Ryan. He was not introduced as her attorney. Eleanor introduced him as her friend Charles, which was also true. He was 70 years old, wore a cardigan and reading glasses, and looked like someone's retired uncle. He sat at the far end of the table with a cup of tea and a legal pad and said very little for the first 40 minutes. Diane and Ryan arrived together at 11. Amber came with Ryan. They brought a fruit platter, which Diane set on the kitchen counter with the manner of someone making an offering. She looked around Eleanor's dining room, with eyes that moved quickly and catalogued carefully the furniture, the shelves, the framed photographs on the wall. I had seen her do it before. She was assessing, calculating what things might be worth and how they might be moved. She noticed Aldridge and paused. Charles, Eleanor said from her chair at the head of the table, an old friend. He happened to be in the neighborhood. I hope you don't mind, Diane minded. I could see it in the half-second recalibration behind her eyes. But she sat, Ryan sat. Amber sat beside Ryan and looked at the fruit platter and seemed to wish she were elsewhere. Eleanor opened the meeting the way she opened everything. Without preamble. Without warmth designed to put people at ease, with simple direct language that assumed the people across from her were adults. I asked you here because I want to discuss my estate, she said. I am 80 years old. I am in reasonable health. My mind is clear, as Charles can attest, having known me for 11 years. She looked at Aldridge briefly. He nodded. She looked back at Diane. I want to have this conversation now, while I am well, so that there are no misunderstandings later. Diane folded her hands on the table. Of course, Eleanor, we appreciate you including us. I am not including you, Eleanor said pleasantly. I am informing you. The room was very quiet for a moment. My affairs are in order, Eleanor continued. I made the decisions I wanted to make 3 years ago, and I have not changed my mind. I do not intend to change my mind. The purpose of this meeting is not to discuss alternatives. She looked at Ryan, then at Diane. The purpose is to give you an opportunity to ask questions or raise concerns directly, to my face, so that I can respond to them directly. I prefer that to phone calls to my physician. Diane's expression did not change, but her hands tightened on the table. Mom, Ryan said, to Diane, not to Eleanor. A warning note. I don't know what you mean by that, Diane said. I think you do, Eleanor said. I received a call from Dr. Marsh in February. She told me you had contacted her office with concerns about my cognitive state. Eleanor's voice remained level. I want to give you the opportunity to raise those concerns here, in person. Silence. I was worried, Diane said. I am worried. You're alone in this house and you're making significant financial decisions, and I wanted to make sure you were getting proper support. I am not alone, Eleanor said. Brianna is here, Brianna is. Diane stopped. Recalibrated. I love Brianna. But she's not a professional caregiver, and I wonder sometimes whether the amount of time she's spending here is healthy. For both of you, I did not move. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me. Are you suggesting, Eleanor said, that Brianna is taking advantage of me? I'm suggesting, Diane said carefully, that sometimes people in Brianna's position, without meaning to, can have an influence on an older person's decisions, and that it might be worth having a neutral party involved. The word position. I noted it. The implication was clear and deliberate, that I was there for what I could get. That my presence in Eleanor's home was strategic rather than relational. That my grandmother's affection for me was a vulnerability being exploited. Ryan said nothing. Amber was looking at the fruit platter, Eleanor looked at Diane for a long moment. The kind of look that takes a person apart without moving. Diane, she said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Diane straightened slightly. Of course, what do you believe you are entitled to receive from my estate? The question landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Diane blinked. I'm not here to talk about entitlement, Eleanor. I'm here because I care about you. You contacted my physician, Eleanor said. You called my grandchildren's cousins to suggest I was being isolated. You telephoned me in December to recommend I update my estate documents and offered me the name of an attorney. Eleanor's voice had not changed in register or temperature. It was the same voice she used to ask if you wanted more tea. Those are not the actions of someone who is simply caring about me. Those are the actions of someone who believes they have a stake in an outcome. She paused. I am asking you to tell me what outcome you believe you deserve. The room held its breath. And Diane, who had never in her life been able to tolerate a silence that felt like losing, spoke. I have been part of this family for 30 years, she said. I took care of your son. I raised 2 children in a house that belongs to you, that I have maintained and cared for and treated as my own. Yes, I think that deserves to be recognized. I think it would be fair for Ryan to be considered. And I think the way things are currently arranged, her voice tightened, does not reflect the reality of who has actually shown up for this family. She stopped. The room was completely still. I looked at Aldridge at the far end of the table. He was writing on his legal pad. He had been writing for the last 4 minutes. Eleanor looked at Diane for a long moment, then she looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at the table. Thank you, Eleanor said. For being honest, she reached for her teacup. She took a sip. She set it down. Charles, she said, without looking at him. I believe you have what you need. Aldridge looked up from his legal pad. I do, he said. Diane looked from Eleanor to Aldridge. Something moved across her face, the first real uncertainty I had seen there. What does that mean? What does he have? Eleanor stood. She was 5 feet, 82 years old, and she stood with the kind of authority that has nothing to do with height. This meeting is finished, she said. Thank you for coming. Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in the last week of April. She had known it was coming the way she knew most things, quietly in advance without making a production of it. Her doctor had told her in March that the fatigue was not incidental. Eleanor had listened, asked 3 questions, thanked the physician for her directness, and driven herself home. She told me that evening, at the kitchen table, over tea, the way she told me everything that mattered. Without softening it, without theater, with the plain respect of one adult addressing another. How long, I said. Weeks, possibly. Months if I'm stubborn. She almost smiled. I intend to be stubborn. She was. She made it 7 weeks after that conversation. She spent them doing exactly what she wanted. Tending the garden through the first warmth of April, finishing the crossword every morning, hosting Gerald the boiler man for coffee when he came to do the spring inspection of the rental properties, watching the evening news and offering commentary to no one in particular. She read 2 novels. She called her remaining sister in Florida every Sunday. She did not go to the hospital until 4 days before the end, and when she did, she made it clear she was going for comfort and not for intervention. I was with her when she passed. It was 6:18 in the morning. The window in her hospital room faced east, and the light was just beginning. I called Aldridge from the parking lot. He answered immediately, which told me he had been expecting the call. He said he was sorry, and he meant it. His voice had the particular quality of someone who has known a person well and is marking the specific loss of that specific person, not performing condolence. He told me he would handle the notifications. He told me the formal reading of the trust document would take place within 10 days, per Eleanor's instructions. He told me there was a letter. What kind of letter? I said. Eleanor wrote several letters in the weeks before she passed, he said. She gave them to me in March, after our last meeting with your mother, to be held and distributed at the reading. There is one for you. There is one addressed to Diane. He paused. Eleanor asked that the one to Diane be read aloud at the formal reading. In the presence of everyone, I stood in the parking lot, in the early morning light, for a long time after I hung up. I drove back to Birchwood Lane. I went through Eleanor's house in the particular silence of a place that has just lost its inhabitant, the presence of someone gone so recently the air has not had time to forget them. Her cardigan was on the hook by the back door. The graph paper garden diagram was still on the kitchen counter, weighted down by her reading glasses. 2 crossword puzzles, completed, on the side table by her chair. I did not call Diane that morning. Aldridge handled it. I was told afterward that Diane had cried on the phone, which I believed. Diane's grief was real. Whatever else was also real alongside it. She had known Eleanor for 30 years. Grief and appetite can occupy the same person simultaneously. I had stopped expecting people to be only one thing at a time. The formal reading was scheduled for a Thursday, 10 days after Eleanor's passing, at Aldridge's office in Stamford. Aldridge sent formal written notification to all required parties. The required parties, per the trust document, were myself, as trustee and beneficiary, and any individuals with a potential legal claim, which in practice meant Diane and Ryan had been notified as a courtesy and a legal formality, not because they had standing. They arrived together as they always did. Diane wore black. Ryan wore a dark suit. Amber was not present. Ryan had come alone, which surprised me until I considered that Amber had looked profoundly uncomfortable at the March meeting and may have had the self-preservation to stay home. Two of Eleanor's cousin's children were there as well, the ones she had remained close with. Margaret, who was 72 and had driven in from Westport, and her brother Harold, who was 70 and had Eleanor's same quality of stillness. Eleanor had asked Aldridge to invite them. I understood why when I saw them. She had wanted witnesses who had loved her, not just parties with interests. I arrived first and sat in the chair I had sat in at my very first meeting with Aldridge, 6 months earlier. The room looked the same. The folder on the blotter looked heavier. When everyone was seated, Aldridge opened without ceremony. He began with the trust instrument itself. He explained its structure, the revocable living trust, the conversion to irrevocable upon Eleanor's passing, the successor trustee provisions. He named me by full name as sole successor trustee and sole beneficiary. He listed the assets, the Birchwood Lane property, the 3 Fairfield County rental properties, Hayes Property Management LLC with its operating accounts and existing contracts, and liquid trust assets totaling $1.4 million. He read the property addresses, he read the account numbers, he read the valuations. The room was very quiet. Diane's face had gone through several expressions by the time he finished the asset list. The first was concentration. The second was something that might have been confusion, though I did not think she was confused. She was calculating, rapidly, whether there was something she had missed, some clause or provision that would change the bottom line. The third expression settled in when it became clear there was nothing to recalculate. It was a kind of blankness, the look of a structure that has lost its load-bearing wall. Ryan stared at the table. Margaret and Harold sat with their hands in their laps and did not look at Diane. Aldridge continued. He read the no contest clause. He explained the provision governing Diane's occupancy of the Birchwood Lane property, the revocable license, the automatic termination upon Eleanor's death, the 60-day vacate provision. He used precise, even language. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The Birchwood Lane property, he said, effective as of Eleanor Hayes' date of death, is the sole property of Brianna Hayes as successor trustee and beneficiary of the Hayes Family Trust. Any current occupants of the property will receive formal written notice of the 60-day vacate provision within 5 business days. Diane made a sound. It was small and involuntary, the kind of sound that escapes before a person can stop it. She pressed her lips together. Her hands on the table were very still. There are several letters, Aldridge said, that Eleanor asked me to distribute at this reading. He reached into the folder. There is a letter for Brianna, which I will provide privately. He set a sealed envelope to one side. There is also a letter that Eleanor asked to be read aloud. It is addressed to Diane. Diane straightened. Her chin came up slightly. Whatever she was feeling, she was not going to let the room see it if she could help it. All right, she said. Aldridge opened the envelope. He unfolded 2 pages of Eleanor's stationery, the pale gray paper, with her initials at the top that she had used for as long as I could remember. He smoothed them on the desk. He put on his reading glasses. He read the opening, a brief paragraph acknowledging Eleanor's love for her family, her gratitude for the years, her hope that those she left behind would be well. Then he reached the paragraph Eleanor had written for Diane. He read it in the same level, unhurried voice he used for everything. I watched Diane's face as he read. The color left it slowly, the way light leaves a room at the end of the day. Gradually, then all at once. Her jaw tightened, her eyes went very still. Beside her, Ryan read something in his mother's face and looked down at his hands. When Aldridge finished the paragraph, he folded the pages and removed his glasses. The room held a silence so complete, I could hear the building's ventilation system somewhere above us. Margaret, at the far end of the table, exhaled once. Harold did not move. Diane did not speak. She did not cry. She sat with the expression of someone who has received information they cannot undo, not surprised by it exactly, but confronted with it in a form that made denial impossible. Something she had perhaps always known, translated finally into words. In another person's voices, in a room full of witnesses, Eleanor had written one paragraph, 12 sentences. She had written it in March, handed it to Aldridge in a sealed envelope, and said, "Read this last. I will not repeat every word here. Eleanor wrote it for Diane, not for anyone else, and some things are private even when they have been witnessed." But there was one sentence at the center of it. The one Aldridge's voice landed on with the particular weight of careful punctuation that I have carried with me since. Eleanor wrote, "I did not leave you nothing, because I did not love you. I left you nothing, because I watched, for 30 years, what you did with what you were given, and I decided the most loving thing I could do for my granddaughter was to make sure you could never do it to her." Diane stood up. She did not say anything. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She opened it and went through it, and the door closed behind her. Ryan sat for another moment. Then he stood quietly and followed his mother out. Aldridge set the letter down. Margaret reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Outside the window, Stamford went on with its afternoon, indifferent and ordinary, the way the world always does when something inside a room has ended. The elevator doors had barely closed behind Diane when Aldridge's assistant appeared in the doorway with a box of tissues and a look that suggested she had been listening, or had seen enough readings to know when one had been particularly significant. She set the tissues on the table without comment and withdrew. Margaret took one. Harold accepted one when she offered. I held mine and did not use it. I was not ready to cry yet. I was still inside the thing that had just happened. The way you are still inside a piece of music for a few seconds after the last note. Aldridge gave us 10 minutes. He excused himself with the quiet efficiency of a man who understands that some rooms need to breathe after he has emptied them. Margaret and Harold sat with me, and we did not talk about Diane or Ryan or the letter. Margaret talked about Eleanor, a specific memory, a July 4th 30 years ago at a lake house that Eleanor and my grandfather had rented for a week, and how Eleanor had organized the entire extended family's meals for 7 days, with a handwritten schedule posted on the refrigerator, and had not once appeared stressed. Harold said Eleanor had beaten him at Scrabble every single time they had played for 50 years, and had never once been gracious about it. And Margaret laughed, and I laughed too, and it felt like Eleanor was in the room briefly, satisfied. When Aldridge returned, he gave me the second envelope, the one addressed to me, and told me I could read it in my own time. He walked me through the immediate next steps, the trust transfer documents I would need to sign, the timeline for the property notifications, the process for transitioning Hayes Property Management LLC into my name. He was thorough and unhurried. Eleanor had chosen him well. I drove back to Birchwood Lane in the early afternoon. The April light was the particular gold of 4 o'clock, the kind that makes everything look considered, deliberate. I parked in Eleanor's driveway, my driveway, though my mind kept correcting back to Eleanor's, and sat for a moment before going inside. The house was as I had left it that morning. Eleanor's cardigan still on the hook, the garden diagram on the counter, the reading glasses. I made tea, because it was what you did in that kitchen, and I sat at the table and opened Eleanor's letter. She had written 4 pages. I will not share all of it, some of it was practical. Notes on the tenants, on Gerald, on the specific quirks of the Birchwood Lane boiler that even Gerald sometimes misdiagnosed. Some of it was personal in a way I am still not ready to translate into words for anyone else. Near the end she wrote, "You have always known who you are. You simply needed time in a place where that was allowed to matter. This is that place now. Stay as long as you need it." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I folded the letter and put it in the drawer of Eleanor's kitchen table, where she had kept things she wanted to be able to find. The formal written notice of the 60-day vacate provision was delivered to Diane at the Birchwood Lane address. The other Birchwood Lane, Diane's house, the one she had lived in for 11 years as Eleanor's guest. 5 business days after the reading, as Aldridge had specified. I did not deliver it myself. A process server handled it, which Aldridge had recommended, because he said it created a cleaner legal record, and also, I suspected, because he was a precise man who understood the difference between what was necessary and what was additionally painful. Diane called me 40 minutes after the notice was delivered. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. I listened to it once. She used the word unfair 4 times and the word betrayal twice, and she said that Eleanor had clearly not been in her right mind, that the letter at the reading had been cruel, that no mother does that to another mother, that she would be consulting an attorney. Her voice cracked twice. I believed the grief underneath the anger because I knew Diane well enough to know that for her, losing felt like being wronged, always, regardless of what had led to it. She did consult an attorney. The attorney reviewed the trust document, the no contest clause, the March meeting notes that Aldridge had compiled, the voice recording from that meeting, and the log I had kept for 23 pages from January through April. The attorney called Aldridge's office 4 days later. The call lasted 11 minutes. Aldridge's assistant told me it had been a brief and conclusive conversation. Diane's attorney withdrew from the case within the week. Ryan called me once, on a Sunday evening, 10 days after the reading. He did not mention the letter or the trust or the vacate notice. He asked if I was doing okay. His voice had the quality of someone trying to locate solid ground after an earthquake, tentative, recalibrating. I told him I was okay. He said he was sorry about Grandma Eleanor. I said thank you. There was a long pause in which several things could have been said, and neither of us said them. I didn't know, he said finally. I know, I said. Whether that was entirely true, I could not say. Ryan had not driven the machinery of the past months. But he had sat in the passenger seat without protest, and at some point that becomes its own kind of decision. I was not ready to sort through that yet. Maybe I would not be for a long time. Some accounting takes years. We said goodbye and hung up. Diane left the Birchwood Lane property on the 58th day of the 60-day window. I know because Aldridge's assistant confirmed the property was vacant, and I drove by that afternoon, not to see Diane go but to see the house. To look at it from the outside the way you look at something you have inherited, along with all its history, and must now decide what to do with. It was a Wednesday. The hydrangeas Diane had planted 30 years ago, the ones Eleanor had planted first, and Diane had maintained without ever acknowledging that someone else had started them, were beginning their spring growth. New leaves, pale green on the stems, Eleanor had tended for 4 decades. I sat in the car and looked at them for a long time, then something happened that I had not anticipated. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door and unlocked it. My key. Aldridge had transferred it to me with the property documents, and I stood in the front hall of a house I had grown up in and understood, for the first time, that it did not feel like Diane's house anymore. The furniture was gone. The rooms were clean and empty. The afternoon light came through the windows and fell across the floors without anyone in it. It felt, standing there, like something reset. Like a space returned to itself after a long occupation by something that had not belonged to it. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen where I had washed dishes at Thanksgiving, while Diane told me Eleanor should move somewhere smaller. The hallway where I had stood at 7 years old and been told I was too loud. The porch where 4 months ago, my mother had turned off the light and locked the door in the rain. I stood on the porch for a moment. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere down the block. The late April air smelled like wet earth and new grass, and then the specific green smell of things beginning again. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect a moment like this to feel like winning, and it did not feel like winning. It felt like relief. The specific, quiet relief of a pressure that has been so constant you stopped noticing it, finally releasing. I locked the front door. I drove back to Eleanor's house on Birchwood Lane. My house now. On my street now, though my mind was still learning the grammar of that. And I made tea, and I sat at Eleanor's table, and I thought about what she had said in her letter. Stay as long as you need it. I thought, I think I will stay, and then I thought, I think I already am. 14 months have passed since that afternoon on the porch. I am sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table as I tell you this. The same table, the same window, the same view of the back garden, where the hydrangeas are in full bloom for the second summer since she passed. I have learned their names now, the specific cultivars Eleanor favored, the ones that hold their color longest, and the ones that fade early and need deadheading in late July. I did not know any of this a year ago. Eleanor knew all of it without consulting anything. I am learning to know things the way she knew them. Slowly, by paying attention, the Birchwood Lane property, the one Diane lived in. I spent 3 months deciding what to do with. I did not rush it. Eleanor had said don't rush anything in her letter in the practical section about the business. She said good decisions have a different texture than fast ones, and you learn to tell the difference by making both. I walked through the house 4 more times over those months. I had coffee with Gerald, who had maintained both properties for 11 years, and who told me, over a very good cup of coffee in his truck in my driveway, that Eleanor had once said to him that the difference between a house and a home was intention, and that he had thought about that sentence every day since. I converted the Birchwood Lane property into my design studio. It took 4 months of renovation, which I designed myself, which was the most satisfying professional experience of my life. I kept the bones, the layout, the porch, the original hardwood floors that Diane had covered with carpet in 2015 for reasons I will never understand, and I immediately reversed. I opened the back wall to glass. I installed north-facing skylights in the main room, which now holds my drafting table and 2 client chairs, and a long work table where material samples live in organized rows. The kitchen became a small meeting room. The room where I had once stood in the hallway being told I was too loud became a library. Floor to ceiling, full of architecture books and fabric swatches, and the things I have accumulated over 10 years of doing work I love. I held a small opening in October. Margaret and Harold came. Gerald came. Charles Aldridge came and stood in the main room and looked at the north light and said, Eleanor would have approved of this. I believed him. My business has grown, removing the careful smallness I had maintained for years, the modest car, the vague non-answers, the deliberate underrepresentation of what I was building, turns out to have been its own kind of renovation. I took on 3 new clients in the first 6 months. I raised my rates. I hired an assistant, a 24-year-old named Priya, who is extremely organized and slightly terrifying, which is exactly what I needed. The LLC that I had hidden from Diane for 6 years now operates openly, invoices prominently, and has a sign on the door of a studio on Birchwood Lane in Greenwich, Connecticut. The rental properties are well managed. Gerald handles maintenance. 2 of the 3 units have had the same tenants for years. The retired school teacher in Westport did plant her vegetable garden and sent me photographs of the tomatoes in August, with a note that said Eleanor had always said yes, and she hoped I would too. I said yes. The tomatoes looked excellent. Hayes Property Management LLC is mine. I have changed nothing about how Eleanor ran it, which is the most sincere tribute I know how to pay. Diane moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Fairfield, 40 minutes from Greenwich. I know this because Ryan told me in one of the occasional texts we have exchanged over the past year. Careful, short, feeling their way towards something that is not what we were, but might become something functional and honest. He told me she was adjusting. He said it the way people say things when they mean the opposite and know that you know, but are trying anyway. I appreciated the trying. I have not spoken to Diane. I have thought about it. I have thought about it the way you think about a door you are not sure you want to open. Not because you are afraid of what is behind it, but because you are not certain yet what you would want to say, and Eleanor taught me that you do not open your mouth until you know. I may call her someday. I may write a letter. I may do nothing and let the distance do what time does to things, settle them or not. I do not know yet. I am giving myself permission not to know. What I know is this. I know that I spent 32 years making myself smaller in order to take up the correct amount of space in my mother's perception of the world, and that it did not work, and that it was never going to work. Because the problem was never my size. The problem was that Diane had decided what I was allowed to be before I was old enough to decide it for myself, and she was very committed to that decision, and the only way out of it was to stop participating. I know that Eleanor Hayes was the most precise, patient, and quietly powerful person I have ever known, that she built something over decades and placed it, carefully, in the hands of the person she trusted with it, that she did not do it out of cruelty toward Diane, though it may have looked that way from the outside. She did it out of love for me, and out of the long, clear-eyed recognition that love without structure is just sentiment, and sentiment does not protect anyone. I know that the sentence she wrote, the one Aldridge read aloud in that conference room in Stamford on a Thursday afternoon in May, is the truest thing anyone has ever said about what happened in my family. I go back to it when I need to. I did not leave you nothing because I did not love you. I left you nothing because I watched, for 30 years, what you did with what you were given, and I decided the most loving thing I could do for my granddaughter was to make sure you could never do it to her. One cold sentence. 12 words that mattered and the rest that explained them. Eleanor had held it for years, written it in March, and trusted Aldridge to deliver it in a room full of witnesses. She did not need to shout. She never had. I am 32 years old. I live in a house that smells like Earl Grey and wood polish, and something I still cannot name. The hydrangeas are blooming. Priya is coming at 9 tomorrow with a new client brief. Gerald texted this morning to say the Westport boiler is running clean. The garden diagram is still on the kitchen counter, weighted down by Eleanor's reading glasses. I have not moved it. I do not think I will. If you have ever been dismissed by someone who was supposed to see you. If you have ever stood in the rain outside a door that should have been open. I want you to know that the people who truly love you are already preparing something on your behalf. Sometimes quietly, sometimes for years. Sometimes you do not find out until it is time to find out. Eleanor knew the right moment. She always did. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell me about someone who loved you quietly, in the way that mattered. Hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more stories coming. And some of them are even longer and more complicated than this one. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means more than you know.